Hi everyone. I 35F. Need to vent about my mother-in-law Margaret 68F. She has been a thorn in my side ever since Alex 38M. And I got married 8 years ago. And honestly, I feel like I'm losing my mind trying to keep it all together. Let me start from the beginning. Margaret is your textbook narcissist. She's the type of person who thrives on control and attention. If she's not the center of everything, she's miserable. And she makes sure everyone else is too. Case in point. She wore a cream dress to our wedding. Not ivory, not off-white cream. She tried to justify it by saying it was just a nice outfit, and that I was being overly sensitive. But come on, she's not clueless. She knew exactly what she was doing. To make it worse, Alex defended her, saying she probably didn't mean anything by it and that I shouldn't let it ruin the day. I bit my tongue because I didn't want to start a fight on our wedding day. But the memory of her smug face haunts me to this day. That's just one example. Over the years, Margaret has made it her mission to be involved in every aspect of our lives, whether we want her to be or not. She calls constantly, just to check in. But the calls always turn into thinly veiled criticisms. Oh, are you still renting that apartment? I thought you'd have a house by now. Still working that job? You know, Alex could do better if he wasn't so tied down. Stuff like that. I've tried so hard to take the high road. I ignore her jabs and play nice for Alex's sake because he's always said, "That's just how my mom is." But it's not just how she is. It's a deliberate effort to undermine me and assert her dominance. It's exhausting, and I feel like I'm constantly walking on eggshells around her. The worst part is that Alex never really stands up for me. He makes excuses for her, saying she's old-fashioned or that she doesn't mean any harm. But how can someone not mean harm when they're constantly tearing me down? I've brought it up to him so many times, but he always brushes it off or tells me I'm overreacting. It's gotten to the point where I feel like I'm battling both of them instead of just her. A few years ago, things came to a head when Margaret decided to redecorate our living room as a surprise. She had a key to our place because Alex insisted it was good for emergencies. While we were out of town visiting friends, she let herself in, replaced our furniture with stuff she picked out, and even put up photos of herself and Alex on the walls. When we got home, I was livid. She acted like she'd done us this huge favor, but all I saw was a violation of my space. Alex, of course, defended her, saying she was just trying to help. I made him change the locks after that. He said I was being dramatic, but I didn't care. I needed some sense of control over my own home. It's not just the big things, though. It's the little things that add up and make me feel like I'm constantly being pushed aside. She'll invite us over for dinner, but it's always about her and Alex. She'll spend the entire evening talking about his childhood, his accomplishments, and how proud she is of him, barely acknowledging my presence. If I try to join the conversation, she'll find a way to steer it back to herself or him. One time she even suggested that we should start fresh and move into the house next door to hers so she could help with the kids when we had them. I don't even want kids, which she knows, but she just laughed it off and said, "Oh, you'll change your mind." It felt less like a suggestion and more like a threat. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. I love Alex, but his unwillingness to set boundaries with his mother is driving a wedge between us. I've tried everything, calm conversations, couples therapy, even taking a step back from family events, but nothing changes. Margaret is still Margaret, and Alex is still stuck in her web. I'm starting to wonder if I'm the problem. Maybe I'm being too sensitive or expecting too much. But then I think about all the times I've swallowed my feelings and tried to make peace, only to have it thrown back in my face. I don't know what to do anymore. Has anyone else dealt with a mother-in-law like this? How do you cope when it feels like your partner is more loyal to their parent than to you? I could really use some advice right now. When I got pregnant with our first son, it felt like a miracle, but it came after a lot of pain. Before that pregnancy, I had a miscarriage, which was devastating. It took me months to even begin processing the grief, and Alex and I decided to keep things private this time around. We waited until I was 4 months along before telling anyone, even close family. I was nervous but excited when we decided to announce the pregnancy. It felt like a fresh start, something beautiful after such a dark time. Of course, Margaret managed to turn it into a complete disaster. We told her over dinner at her house, thinking it would be a special moment. I thought she'd be thrilled. Finally, the grandchild she'd been dropping not-so-subtle hints about for years. But as soon as the words were out of my mouth, her face dropped. I thought maybe she was shocked, but no. It was something else. She looked offended, almost like I'd just insulted her. "You waited 4 months to tell me," she said, her voice dripping with hurt. I tried to explain that we'd wanted to make sure everything was okay before announcing it, especially after what happened last time. But Margaret didn't care. "I'm your mother-in-law," she snapped. "I should have been one of the first to know. I can't believe you would exclude me from something so important." Exclude her? Really? This wasn't about her. It was about me and Alex, about our baby. But she made it all about her as usual. She went on and on about how hurt she was, how she deserved to be involved from the beginning, and how she couldn't understand why we didn't trust her with the news sooner. The whole thing was humiliating. What should have been a joyful moment turned into yet another power struggle. I barely got a word in because Margaret was too busy making a scene, and Alex just sat there, awkwardly trying to calm her down. He kept saying things like, "Mom, it's not a big deal. And we just wanted to be careful." But it didn't help. By the time we left, I was on the verge of tears. I told Alex how upset I was, how Margaret had completely ruined what should have been a happy memory. He tried to reassure me, saying she was just emotional, and that she'd get over it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Sure enough, Margaret found ways to inject herself into every aspect of my pregnancy after that. She insisted on coming to doctor's appointments, even when I said no. She started buying baby clothes and furniture without asking us, then got offended when I told her we wanted to pick those things out ourselves. One time, she showed up at our house unannounced with a giant crib she'd bought, expecting us to replace the one we'd already chosen. When I told her we didn't need it, she got this wounded look on her face and said, "I just wanted to help. You're making me feel like I'm not welcome in this baby's life." It was exhausting. No matter how many boundaries I tried to set, Margaret bulldozed through them. And every time I pushed back, Alex would tell me to just let it go, because it wasn't worth the fight. But it was worth the fight to me. This was my pregnancy, my body, my baby. Why did Margaret get to act like she had more of a say than I did? The worst part was that I couldn't even enjoy the pregnancy anymore. Every time something exciting happened, like feeling the baby kick for the first time, I'd catch myself dreading how Margaret would try to take over or make it about her. It felt like she was stealing the joy out of everything, and I hated her for it. I don't know how I made it through those 9 months without losing my mind. Looking back, I wish I'd stood up for myself more. But it's hard when you feel like your partner isn't in your corner. Alex kept telling me to be patient with his mom, but how patient am I supposed to be? I'd love to hear from anyone who's dealt with a controlling mother-in-law during a pregnancy. How do you keep your sanity when someone is constantly overstepping? And how do you get your partner to actually back you up instead of just making excuses for their parent? A few months after our son, Ethan, was born, Margaret and her husband, Henry, moved into this enormous $2 million estate in the suburbs. The house was exactly what you'd expect from Margaret. Flashy, over the top, and designed to show off how much money they had. She was so proud of it, constantly bringing it up in conversations, and sending pictures of every room in the house. Of course, she started pestering us to visit as soon as they were settled. "You have to come see it," she'd say every other day. "Ethan will love the playroom we set up for him." As if a 6-month-old cared about a custom playroom. Alex and I kept putting it off. We were both busy with work, and honestly, I didn't feel like dealing with Margaret's theatrics. Every visit with her turned into some kind of passive-aggressive showdown, and I just didn't have the energy for it. But Margaret was relentless. Finally, Alex caved. "Why don't you just go without me?" he suggested one night as we were getting ready for bed. "I know you've been avoiding her, but it's not like she's going to stop asking." I stared at him, completely floored. "You want me to go alone? With Ethan?" He shrugged. "I can't take time off work right now. And she's been asking for months. It'll just be one day. You'll survive." I wanted to argue, but I knew it would just turn into another one of those circular fights where nothing got resolved. So against my better judgment, I agreed. When the day came, I packed up Ethan and drove the 2 hours to Margaret's new house. As soon as I pulled into the long winding driveway, my stomach sank. The place looked like something out of a magazine. Huge columns, manicured lawns, and a front door big enough to fit an elephant through. It was impressive, sure, but it also screamed, "I'm better than you." Margaret was waiting at the door when I arrived, all smiles and fake enthusiasm. "There's my beautiful daughter-in-law," she gushed, pulling me into a hug that lingered a little too long. "And my precious grandson. Oh, he's getting so big." I forced a smile and followed her inside. The house was just as over the top as I expected. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and furniture that looked too expensive to sit on. Margaret gave me the grand tour, pointing out every little detail she'd chosen herself, while Henry followed us around, nodding like her personal hype man. When we finally sat down in the living room, Margaret launched into her usual routine of backhanded compliments and unsolicited advice. "You must be so tired with Ethan," she said, eyeing me critically. "Motherhood can be overwhelming, especially for someone who's not used to it. But don't worry, I'm here to help." I gritted my teeth and thanked her, even though I wanted to scream. She acted like I was some clueless teenager who couldn't handle her own child, and it drove me crazy. Then she dropped the real bomb. "So," she said, leaning forward with a conspiratorial smile, "Henry and I have been talking, and we think you and Alex should move closer to us. There's a beautiful neighborhood just down the road with some lovely houses. It would be perfect for Ethan." I blinked at her, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. "Move closer." "Yes," she said, clapping her hands together. "That way I can help out with Ethan more. And we can spend more time together as a family. Doesn't that sound wonderful?" Wonderful? It sounded like a nightmare. The last thing I wanted was to live anywhere near Margaret, let alone within walking distance. But I didn't know how to say that without setting her off, so I just mumbled something non-committal, and hoped she'd drop it. Of course she didn't. She spent the rest of the visit talking about all the benefits of moving closer to her. How she'd babysit any time we needed, how Henry could help Alex with his career, how much easier life would be with them nearby. By the time I left, my head was spinning. I knew there was no way I could ever live that close to Margaret, but I also knew she wasn't going to let this go. And when I told Alex about it later, he just laughed. "She's just excited," he said. "She doesn't mean anything by it." But she did mean something by it. Margaret never said or did anything without an agenda, and I could feel her claws sinking deeper into our lives with every passing day. I'm at a loss here. How do you deal with someone who refuses to respect boundaries, especially when your partner doesn't see the problem? Am I crazy for feeling like this is all a little too much? The visit to Margaret's house was already wearing on me when things took an absolutely insane turn. I thought I could grit my teeth and get through the day, but I had no idea what I was in for. After lunch, Margaret's daughter Carla showed up with her 12-year-old son Logan. I don't see Carla often, and honestly I'm fine with that. She's basically a younger, more obnoxious version of Margaret, always stirring up drama and acting like she's above everyone else. Logan, on the other hand, is the kind of kid who thinks being a brat is a personality trait. The tension in the house went up the moment they arrived. Margaret and Carla started chatting away, completely ignoring me unless it was to say something patronizing. Meanwhile, Logan ran around the house like he owned the place, screaming and banging on walls. Ethan was getting fussy from all the noise, so I excused myself to the guest room to feed him and calm him down. When I came back out, things felt off. Margaret and Carla were whispering to each other and giggling like teenagers, and Logan kept glancing at me with this mischievous grin. I tried to ignore it, but my gut was telling me something was up. A little while later, Margaret asked me to check on something in one of the upstairs rooms. She said she thought the window was open and wanted to make sure it was closed before it rained. I was suspicious, but I didn't want to cause a scene, so I agreed. When I got to the room, I saw Logan lingering in the hallway. He was grinning like he'd just pulled off the greatest prank in history. Before I could ask him what he was doing, he lunged at me, shoving me backward into the closet. The door slammed shut, and I heard the distinct sound of a lock clicking into place. At first I thought it was a joke, a stupid childish prank. I tried to stay calm, knocking on the door and telling Logan to let me out. But then the lights went out, plunging me into complete darkness. That's when the panic set in. I have a severe phobia of dark, enclosed spaces, thanks to a traumatic experience I had as a kid. I've never been able to shake it, and being locked in that closet brought it all rushing back. My heart started racing, my chest felt tight, and I could barely breathe. I pounded on the door, screaming for someone to let me out, but all I could hear was muffled laughter coming from the other side. "Let me out!" I shouted, my voice shaking. "This isn't funny." But they didn't let me out. I don't know how long I was in there, it felt like an eternity. I was crying, hyperventilating, and on the verge of a full-blown panic attack. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, and I honestly thought I might pass out. Finally, the door opened, and the light from the hallway flooded in. I stumbled out, shaking and gasping for air. Margaret and Carla were standing there, laughing like it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," Margaret said, waving a hand dismissively. "It was just a harmless prank." "Yeah," Carla added, smirking. "You should have seen your face." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Do you have any idea what you just did to me?" I snapped. "I have a phobia of dark, enclosed spaces." "That wasn't a prank. It was cruel." Margaret rolled her eyes. "Oh, stop. You're fine. Maybe this will help you get over it." "Get over it?" I was so furious I could barely form words. I turned to Logan, who was grinning like he'd won some kind of award. "What were you thinking?" I demanded. "It was just a joke," he mumbled, clearly not sorry. I was done. I grabbed Ethan, who was thankfully still asleep in his car seat, and told Margaret I was leaving. She tried to stop me, saying I was overreacting and that I should stay for dinner, but I ignored her. The whole drive home, I was shaking with anger and disbelief. When I told Alex what happened, he looked horrified at first, but then he started making excuses. "Maybe they didn't realize how serious it was," he said. "Are you kidding me?" I shot back. "I told them I have a phobia." Margaret knew. She just didn't care. He sighed and rubbed his temples. "I'll talk to her." But he never did. Or if he did, it didn't change anything because Margaret never apologized. In fact, the next time I saw her, she acted like nothing had happened. I don't know how much more of this I can take. Margaret's behavior has always been bad, but this was a new low. And the fact that Alex keeps brushing it off makes me feel completely alone in this. Has anyone else dealt with a family member who pulls this kind of crap? How do you handle it when your partner won't stand up for you? I'm at my wit's end. After Logan shoved me into the closet and locked the door, I thought someone would let me out pretty quickly, even if they were trying to be funny. But no one came. I sat there in total darkness, crying, trembling, and begging for help. At first, I knocked and shouted, thinking Margaret or Carla might hear me and decide the prank had gone too far. I called out their names, but all I could hear was laughter from somewhere downstairs, probably the kitchen. They were having a great time while I was trapped in a pitch-black closet, fighting back a full-blown panic attack. I had my phone with me, so I tried calling Margaret first. It rang a few times, then went to voicemail. Called Carla next, same thing. No one picked up. I could still hear them laughing, and it was clear they were deliberately ignoring me. I left them both messages, pleading for them to let me out, but they didn't care. By then I was sobbing. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely scroll through my contacts, but I finally decided to call Alex. He was my husband. He was supposed to be my support, my safe place. When he picked up, I could barely get the words out. "Alex, they locked me in a closet. I need you to call them and tell them to let me out." His response: "I'm really busy right now. Can't you just wait for them to let you out? It's not my business to get involved." I froze. "Not your business? I'm your wife, Alex. I'm locked in a closet, having a panic attack, and you're telling me it's not your business." He sighed like I was inconveniencing him. "Look, I'll talk to them later, but I can't deal with this right now. I'm in the middle of something." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I hung up on him, shaking with a mix of fear and rage. My own husband couldn't even be bothered to stand up for me or make a simple phone call. At that point, I was desperate. I scrolled through my contacts again and found Henry's number. I'd barely spoken to him all day, but I figured he was my last chance. I called, and to my immense relief, he actually answered. "Henry, please help me," I sobbed. "They locked me in a closet and I can't get out." There was a pause, then he said, "They what?" I could hear the disbelief in his voice. He said he was on his way home and told me to hang tight. It felt like an eternity, but about 20 minutes later, I heard the front door slam and Henry's voice echoing through the house. "What the hell is going on here?" he bellowed. There was some muffled arguing downstairs, and then footsteps came rushing up the stairs. The closet door swung open, and there stood Henry looking furious. I stumbled out, tears streaming down my face, and he immediately started apologizing. I had no idea they'd done something like this. "Are you okay?" I couldn't even answer him. I was too shaken to say anything coherent. Margaret and Carla had finally come upstairs by then, and instead of apologizing they started defending themselves. "Oh, calm down," Margaret said, rolling her eyes. "It was just a harmless joke." "Yeah," Carla chimed in. "She's being so dramatic. It wasn't a big deal." Henry turned on them, his face red with anger. "Are you two out of your minds? You locked her in a closet and left her there? Do you have any idea how dangerous that is?" They both looked taken aback, like they hadn't expected him to take my side. Margaret stammered something about not realizing she'd be so upset, but Henry wasn't having it. He told them both to leave me alone and stormed off. I grabbed Ethan, who had been napping in his car seat this whole time, and left as fast as I could. On the drive home I kept replaying the events in my head, and the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Not just at Margaret and Carla, but at Alex. When I walked through the door, I confronted him immediately. "Do you even care about what I just went through?" I demanded. He looked up from his laptop, clearly annoyed. "I told you I was busy. That's your excuse? I was locked in a closet for an hour, Alex. An hour. And you couldn't even make a phone call." He shrugged. "What do you want me to say? It's over now. You're fine." I couldn't believe his indifference. This wasn't just about the closet, it was about everything. Every time Margaret overstepped, every time she hurt me, Alex brushed it off like it didn't matter. And now he was doing it again. I don't know how much more of this I can take. I feel so alone in this marriage, like I'm fighting a battle on my own while Alex stands on the sidelines. What would you do in my situation? How do you get through to someone who refuses to see how much their family is hurting you? The day after the closet incident, I was still shaken and trying to process everything. I hadn't even gotten a real apology from Margaret or Carla, and Alex's indifference made it all worse. I was exhausted, angry, and feeling completely unsupported. Then things somehow got even worse. A friend texted me a link with the message, "Is this you?" I clicked on it and my stomach dropped. It was a TikTok video. Logan had filmed himself shoving me into the closet, captioned it, "Welcome the new Queen of Darkness. Face with tears of joy, face with tears of joy." The video showed me pounding on the door and screaming for help while he cackled on the other side. It had over 15,000 views. People were commenting things like, "OL Savage Kid," and "She sounds so mad," with laughing emojis. I felt humiliated. It wasn't just a cruel prank anymore. Now it was public and complete strangers were laughing at my misery. I couldn't believe this kid thought it was okay to post something like that. But honestly, I wasn't surprised. Logan had clearly learned from the best, Margaret and Carla. What really shocked me was that Margaret and Carla let him do it. They were right there. They knew how much it hurt me, and they still didn't stop him. I immediately sent the video to our family group chat with a simple message. "This is unacceptable." It didn't take long for Margaret to reply. "Oh, come on," she wrote. "It's just a funny joke. Don't take everything so seriously." I stared at the screen in disbelief. A funny joke? That video was me at my most vulnerable, crying and begging for help. And she thought it was funny? Carla chimed in next. "Guys do stuff like that all the time," she said. "It's harmless. You need to relax." Relax. I was fuming. I typed out a long message explaining how disrespectful and humiliating this was, how I had a phobia that they deliberately exploited, and how deeply hurt I was. I even pointed out that posting the video without my consent was a massive violation of my privacy. But before I could send it, Alex grabbed my phone. "Don't escalate things," he said, reading over my shoulder. "Escalate?" I snapped. "Your mom and sister let Logan post a video of me crying in a closet, and I'm the one escalating things?" He sighed, clearly annoyed. "It's already done. Getting into a big fight isn't going to help. Just let it go. Let it go." That seemed to be Alex's solution to everything when it came to his family. No matter how much they hurt me, I was supposed to just let it go. But this wasn't something I could brush off. I sent the message anyway, and predictably, it didn't go over well. Margaret and Carla doubled down, accusing me of overreacting and trying to make everyone feel bad. Logan never apologized or even took the video down. I ended up reporting it to TikTok myself, and thankfully they removed it. But the damage was already done. That video felt like a metaphor for my entire relationship with Alex's family. They humiliate me, disrespect me, and laugh at my expense, while Alex stands by and does nothing. That night, I told Alex I didn't want to go to his parents' house again. Not for dinner, not for holidays, not for anything. They don't respect me, I said. And you don't stand up for me. I'm done. He looked shocked. You can't just cut them out, he said. They're my family. Well, I'm your family too, I shot back. But you don't treat me like it. You always take their side, no matter what they do. We had a huge fight about it. He accused me of being too sensitive and holding grudges, and I told him he was spineless for never defending me. By the end of it, we were barely speaking. I'm at a breaking point. I don't know how to move forward from here. I love Alex, but I can't keep living like this. I feel like I'm constantly being disrespected and dismissed, not just by his family but by him too. Has anyone else dealt with a situation like this? How do you get your partner to see how toxic their family is without it destroying your relationship? Because right now I don't see a way out. Things came to a head not long after the TikTok incident. I couldn't let it go, no matter how much Alex told me to move on. Something about it didn't sit right. Logan was obnoxious, sure, but he wasn't exactly subtle. I started wondering if someone had put him up to the joke. The answer came sooner than I expected. A few days later, I got a text from Logan, of all people. It was weirdly out of character, just a short, "I'm sorry for what I did" message. It seemed too polished to be genuine, and when I showed it to Alex, he shrugged. At least he apologized, he said. But I wasn't buying it. I decided to dig a little deeper. I asked a mutual family friend if they'd heard anything about the closet incident or the TikTok video. And that's when everything started unraveling. They told me Margaret had been bragging about how Logan had gotten me good, and how it was just a little harmless fun. But the kicker? She'd apparently referred to me as not real family, saying Logan shouldn't feel bad for pranking me, because I wasn't one of them. I was furious. It was bad enough to deal with Margaret's passive-aggressive comments and undermining behavior. But hearing that she'd said those words out loud? It felt like a slap in the face. That's when I decided to go nuclear. I reached out to Logan directly, asking if he wanted to tell me the truth about what had happened. To my surprise, he cracked almost immediately. He admitted that Margaret and Carla had encouraged him to do the prank, calling it a fun little test to see how I'd react. Margaret even told him that I wasn't really family, so he shouldn't feel bad about making me upset. I couldn't believe it. My mind was racing, and my hands were shaking as I screenshotted everything. His messages, the TikTok comments, even the text from Margaret and Carla dismissing my feelings. I wanted proof, not just for myself, but because I knew Alex would never believe me without it. When I confronted Alex with everything, he went pale. He read the messages in silence, his mouth opening and closing like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Finally he muttered, "I had no idea." No idea. I snapped. "This is who your mother is, Alex. She's been like this for years, and you've done nothing but defend her." He tried to apologize, but I wasn't having it. "You let her walk all over me," I said. "You let her humiliate me, and now she's dragging our son into her games. How can you just sit there and act like this isn't a big deal?" For the first time, I saw real regret in his eyes. He admitted he'd been wrong to brush off my concerns, and that he didn't realize how bad things had gotten. But then he said something that made my blood boil. "She's still my mom, though. I can't just cut her out." I stared at him stunned. "So what are you saying? That I should just keep putting up with this? That I should keep being her punching bag while you stand by and do nothing?" He didn't answer. That was the moment I realized I couldn't rely on Alex to protect me or our family. I'd been waiting for him to stand up to Margaret for years, but it was clear that wasn't going to happen. If I wanted to set boundaries, I'd have to do it myself. I told Alex I was done attending family events where Margaret was present. I didn't care if it made things awkward or if people thought I was being dramatic. I wasn't going to let her toxic behavior affect me or Ethan anymore. And if Alex wanted to keep playing the role of the dutiful son, that was his choice, but I wasn't going to let it drag me down any longer. I also kept all the screenshots and messages in case Margaret tried to pull something again. I wanted to be prepared, just in case she started spreading lies or trying to make me look like the bad guy. Since then, things have been tense. Alex is trying to act like everything is fine, but I can tell he's struggling to balance his loyalty to me and his fear of confronting his mother. Margaret, of course, is playing the victim, complaining to anyone who will listen about how sensitive I am and how she's being excluded from Ethan's life. I don't know where this leaves us. I love Alex, but I can't keep living in the shadow of his family's dysfunction. At some point he's going to have to choose. Either he stands with me or he stays in Margaret's web. Have any of you been in a situation like this? How do you set boundaries when your partner refuses to enforce them? And how do you move forward when trust has been so deeply broken? It took me longer than I care to admit, but I finally realized my marriage to Alex was over. Looking back, I can't believe how much I put up with. How many times I let him dismiss my feelings, defend his mother, and leave me to fend for myself against her manipulations. The TikTok incident and everything that came after was the final straw. No matter how much evidence I presented, no matter how much I begged Alex to stand up for me, he always defaulted to the same excuse. That's just how she is. I was tired of hearing it. Margaret might be who she is, but that didn't mean I had to keep letting her poison my life. The moment I knew I couldn't do this anymore came during yet another fight about Margaret. I was pleading with Alex to see how deeply her actions had hurt me, how much damage it had done to our relationship. He sighed, exasperated, and said, "Why do you have to make everything so difficult? If you just get along with her, none of this would happen." That was it. Something in me snapped. For years I'd been trying to make peace, trying to keep the family together, trying to get along. And it never mattered. No matter what I did, I was always the bad guy. Alex couldn't, or wouldn't, see that the problem wasn't me. The next morning, I packed up Ethan and went to stay with my parents. I needed space to think, to figure out what I wanted for myself and my son. My parents were incredibly supportive, which was such a relief after years of feeling like I had no one in my corner. They didn't judge me or tell me what to do. They just listened, and for the first time in ages I felt truly seen. While I was there, I started talking to a lawyer about divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt like the only option. I couldn't keep living in a marriage where I was constantly undermined and disrespected. I deserved better, and more importantly, Ethan deserved better. When I told Alex I was filing, he acted like he didn't believe me at first. "You're really going to break up our family over this?" he asked, as if I was the one tearing us apart. But I stayed firm. "This isn't just about Margaret," I told him. "It's about you. You never stood up for me. You let her treat me like I didn't matter, and I can't live like that anymore." He tried to argue, but it was half-hearted, like he knew deep down that I was right. In the end, I think he was more upset about the idea of losing Ethan than he was about losing me. The divorce process wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I moved back in with my parents while I got back on my feet, and they've been a huge help with Ethan. I've started therapy to work through everything I've been through, and I'm slowly rebuilding my sense of self-worth. I won't lie. There are days when I feel angry and bitter about how things turned out. I wasted years trying to make a relationship work with someone who never really had my back. But more than anything, I feel relieved. I'm free now, free from Margaret's toxicity and Alex's indifference. This whole experience has been a hard, painful lesson, but it's also been an opportunity to grow. I've learned that I deserve better. Better than a partner who won't stand up for me. Better than a family that doesn't respect me. And better than a life spent walking on eggshells. For now, I'm focusing on myself and Ethan. He's my priority, and I want to give him a life full of love, support, and positivity. Things I didn't have when I was married. To anyone reading this who's stuck in a similar situation, I want you to know that you're not alone. And you don't have to put up with being treated like you don't matter. It's scary to start over. But sometimes it's the best thing you can do for yourself and your future. Here's to new beginnings.